the theme of what I'm going to talk about tonight is beginning with the Hudson River School, the first authentic school of art here in the United States, and then how that kind of translated over to the White Mountain School of Art. And of course, Benjamin Champney was their great benefactor of that. Let me start with this statement by Thomas Cole. Thomas Cole, of course, was from England, but actually was the beginning of the Hudson River School. But I'm going to start with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. John Adams, on July 4th, 1826, was on his deathbed. He was near death. And as he was dying, he said, "There's only Thomas Jefferson left." Little did he know that Thomas Jefferson had died only a few hours earlier in Monticello. The reason why I mention that is because they were the last of the Civil War, or the Revolutionary War generation. Revolutionary War, of course, Adams and Jefferson had worked together during the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War, the foundation of the Republic, etc. They became bitter rivals when Thomas Jefferson replaced John Adams, the second president, and Jefferson, the third president. It caused them to become bitter rivals. Well, it was only late in life that they really reconciled. But the Revolutionary War generation, that was America's, people reveled in the Revolutionary War. And this painting, by John Trumbull is representative of that Revolutionary War generation. This is, of course, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. You'll see Jefferson there with Adams. John Trumbull was kind of one of the great painters of the historical period, of that period of the Revolutionary War. He and Gilbert Stuart and Charles Wilson Peale were painters who painted the Revolutionary War. The famous painting, and I like to show this painting just because I like this painting, is George Washington resigning his commission. There's a level of humility to this as he resigns his commission, becomes Cincinnati, he goes back to his farm. Later, he's called upon to be the President of the United States. He served 2 terms and felt that was enough, and ceded to John Adams. The Revolutionary War patriots were so popular in their time that that painting of the Declaration of Independence I showed you, that became an engraving that hung in almost every American home. Everybody had a copy of this. The engraver for this was a man by the name of Asher Durand. However, the problem with the United States at this time, or America at this time, was although they had won the revolution and had set up a Republican form of government, they lacked a coherent, identifiable American culture. As one person put it in the 4 corners of the globe, who reads an American book or goes to an American play or looks at an American picture or statue? We had not developed our own culture yet. As a matter of fact, 2 of our greatest painters lived in London. John Singleton Copley, who had painted portraits of John Adams and Paul Revere, had left the United States, or left the colonies in 1774 to set up in London, where he became a very, very successful painter. The other famous American painter at the time was Benjamin West. Benjamin West was from Philadelphia. He had been a portrait painter in Philadelphia in the 1760s, had gone to Italy for 2 years to study. On his way back from Italy, he went to London and never left. He became curator of the King's Pictures and was eventually the 2nd president of the Royal Academy of Art after Sir Joshua Reynolds. So again, America didn't really have identifiable artists except people like John Trumbull, Gilbert Stuart, Charles Wilson Peale, who were basically painted the Revolution. If you think about Gilbert Stuart's famous paintings of George Washington, or Charles Wilson Peale's painting of Washington after some of the battles and things, because he personally knew Washington. Trumbull, though, had started something called the American Academy of Art in New York. The American Academy of Art at the time, art painting historical painting was considered to be the most noble branch of painting. If you depicted historical scenes or scenes from the Bible, those were considered to be the highest level of form of painting. Trumbull, of course, excelled at that. If you think about the Capitol Rotunda, all of those paintings in there, almost all of those are from John Trumbull. Trumbull started the Royal Academy of Art to train students, American students in art. The problem with John Trumbull was he wanted all the students to paint just like John Trumbull, because John Trumbull was John Trumbull's favorite artist. Trumbull, though, was walking in New York City. He passed a bookstore and he saw this picture, which is the Falls of Catterskill, and this is from 1826. This is by Thomas Cole, and I'm going to enlarge this a little bit so you can see it. This is Catterskill Falls, and it's in the Hudson Valley. Has anybody been up there? Has anybody seen this? No. Good, Bob has. What was unique about this painting and what struck Trumbull so much was how authentically American it was. If you take a look, the trees in this have been blasted. They haven't been removed. They've suffered the ravages of nature, but they're authentic. This land has not been touched. In the top, you'll see an American, Native American, and this gave it a sense of authenticity. At the time in the 1820s, people were fascinated by the Indians, although they thought that the American Indians would eventually die out as a breed. Thomas Cole painted this in 1826 with two other paintings that he displayed at the time. The three paintings that he displayed at this time, one was purchased by John Trumbull, one was purchased by Asher Durand, and another was purchased by one of the wealthy merchants in New York. The painting was eventually shown at the American Academy of Art, John Trumbull's place, and it caused a sensation because it was so authentically American. Cole himself was English. Cole was from Bolton in Lancashire. His family had left when he was about 13 or 14 years old, and his biggest impression of Bolton at the time was the Industrial Revolution. He saw how industry was replacing, was taking up the landscape, was taking up the natural landscape in England, and this was a theme that stayed with him throughout his life. Again, he became this almost overnight. He became one of America's most celebrated landscape painters, and was identified later in life, of course, as the founder of the Hudson River School. I'll show you this painting that he did for Daniel Wadsworth. Daniel Wadsworth, of course, was from Connecticut. In Hartford, Connecticut, he was into banking and insurance, quite wealthy. If you've been to the Wadsworth Athenaeum, you've probably seen this painting. He commissioned Cole to paint a picture of his home called Montevideo, and this is the picture that he came out with. Here's Montevideo. There's his wife, or there's his daughter, okay? But it's this huge landscape painting. I mean, it's absolutely, if you get a chance to see it, it's absolutely gorgeous. Very romantic, rich painting. And this Cole and the people who follow Cole now developed kind of an identifiable form of art that was purely an American form of art. So again, when you think about painting, historical painting was the most famous, it was the most well received. John Trumbull, Charles Wilson Peale, those were the famous artists at the time. Portrait artists, of course, that's what you made money on, painting portraits. Thomas Gainsborough, the English painter, who did great landscapes, he said he made all this money painting portraits because he liked painting landscapes and he didn't make any money at it. And then, of course, the lower tier was landscape painting. Cole transformed this, and landscape painting now became an American, an identifiably American art form, and the wealthy people, particularly in New York, wanted to have these pictures in their home because they were authentically American. America started to develop its own culture. Of course, James Fenimore Cooper, The Last of the Mohicans, the first kind of American novel that received international recognition. It was widely read in Europe. And of course, the theme was the Last of the Mohicans, was about Native Americans. Based on that, of course, Cole did several paintings. This is Cora kneeling at the feet of Talmud, which is just back in there. But again, huge landscape painting, beautiful vistas. Just again, right out of the book, The Last of the Mohicans. One of my favorite paintings, of course, is The Death of Cora in The Last of the Mohicans. This is at the University of Pennsylvania. This was done in 1927. Again, big, huge, broad landscape, trees that have not been touched, trees that have been there for centuries that have decayed. But it gives you a sense of the American landscape as something new. For Cole and for painters like him, the American landscape was untouched territory, and there was something providential about it. This was country, this was a world that God had given to the Americans, and they were, and in Cole's painting, you will see a lot of religious overtones. This became the beginning of the Hudson River School, and I will just mention a few of the Hudson River painters that came along. Asher Durand, of course, had started off life as an engraver. He had done the engraving of the Declaration of Independence, that painting by John Trumbull. It made him a lot of money. He became probably the most well-known engraver, doing banknotes and things like that. But he met Cole in 1927 in New York, and he eventually shifted over to landscape painting and became kind of the dean of the Hudson River School. He lived into his 90s. This is Frederick Church. Frederick Church, if you're familiar with him, was Cole's only student. Cole had 2 students in his lifetime. Church was really the only successful student that he had, but he painted huge paintings. You've seen them in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and that's another lecture for like next year. Okay. John Kensett, who was close friends with Asher Durand, who would become very close friends with an artist from New Hampshire by the name of Benjamin Champney. I'll talk a little bit more about Kensett in a few minutes. He became interested in transcendentalism, and you'll see this in his paintings. And then finally, John William Castelier. Castelier, again, friends with Asher Durand, and followed in the footsteps. So these are 4 of the great artists of the Hudson River School. There are dozens, but we only have 9. So, and let me mention one artist that it's kind of hard to classify. Thomas Doty. Thomas Doty was from Philadelphia. He was self-taught. He went to the Pennsylvania Academy to study. At the time, the Pennsylvania Academy was the second academy established in the United States after the New York Academy, but the New York Academy collapsed, and now it's still the longest running art academy in the United States. If you have a chance to go over to the Peabody Essex Museum right now, they're doing a display. Have you seen that? Yeah. I'm going to be there next week. But anyway, he started life as a painter in Philadelphia. This is a painting of the Fairmont Waterworks that he painted in 1924. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. But the, 1824, my wife. 1824. And he did a lot of, painters in these days used to do a lot of what are called topographic paintings, paintings of buildings and things that normally people would not see. But he eventually became more identified with the Hudson River School, and I show you this painting. And if you'd like to see it close up, it's in the other room. Okay. This is a painting that he did in 1836 from here in New Hampshire. He was one of the first artists to come to New Hampshire, and he did this painting. Again, it's in the other room. If you buy Paul a glass of wine, he will tell you all about it. Let me talk about the Hudson River School generally and how it affected the White River School, or the White Mountain School. The Hudson River School, there were basically 3 components to it. 1 was Romanticism, 2 was something called the Sublime, and 3 was Naturalism. Let me go through each one. First was Romanticism. The United States had become, or America was this untouched virgin land, and there is a romance to this, to the land. So this painting by Thomas Cole, this is called Early Autumn View of the Catskills from 1937. It's in the 1837. It's in the Metropolitan. This is a beautiful painting, and you can see how romantic this looks. People playing in the foreground. There's a horse running through here. There's somebody in their canoe or boat or something out on the river. Very romantic view of the. Okay. What you don't see is, in actuality, there is a railroad running through here, and most of these trees have been chopped down. Okay, but he wanted to paint it as this kind of romantic view of the world, and Romanticism, of course, this was to help people experience have experiences on an individual level. Cole, of course, romanticized the American landscape because he had seen the devastation that had taken place in Lancashire with the Industrial Revolution. There's something in here I want to, again, beautiful painting, not exactly accurate. The next thing I want to talk about is the sublime. This notion of the sublime actually comes from Edmund Burke, who was a political philosopher in England back in the 17th century. The sublime refers to a quality of grandeur in art that contains a mixture of wonder, awe, and terror. This is a picture called The Subsiding of the Waters. This is very much, and this again, Thomas Cole, very much what he would paint. On the one side, you can see kind of the destruction, or barely see some of the destruction that has taken place from a flood. And the flood, of course, is subsiding and light is coming into the world. This combination of beauty and terror, okay, the terror of this big flood. Amy Paston, who works at the National Gallery in Washington, observed this about this painting. She said, "For Thomas Cole, the story of the biblical flood was a veiled reference to his adopted country, the United States. Washed clean of the corruption of European monarchies, the new democracy awakens to a promising future." This was clearly an example of sublime, and you will see this in other paintings by Cole and particularly by Thomas Moran. The last thing is naturalism. This is a painting by Asher Durand. It's called In the Woods. It's from 1855. It's at the Metropolitan. Landscape painting was generally, again, landscape painting was not considered to be the highest form of art. Historical painting was the highest form of art. But naturalism began to represent the world as it is. The famous British critic, Jonathan Ruskin, referred to this as a truth to nature, that you would paint something that was actually true to nature, not something that's made up or fancified. This is a painting that he did, and Durand became really an advocate of this naturalist style. Thomas Cole, when you look at a lot of his paintings, which are beautiful paintings, but if you look at a lot of his paintings, they have very heavy religious overtones, and some of them are very didactic. Asher Durand's paintings seem to be much more natural looking. I'll just emphasize this. I've blown this up, but you can see that all the detail in the trees and things like that. Durand believed that that within all of these trees and things, you could experience you could experience the Almighty. You could experience it's something greater than yourself. The great thing about the Hudson River School, of course, was it's the first authentic school of art. It's kind of set the base for landscape painting. Landscape painting became incredibly popular after the Hudson River School became popular in the 1830s and 1840s. And it was distinctive. It was different than Europe. This is a quote by Thomas Cole. He says, "The most distinctive and perhaps the most impressive characteristic of the American scene is its wildness. It is the most distinctive because in civilized Europe, the primitive features of scenery have long since been destroyed or modified. America was still pure. The United States, the New World, was still pure and had been untouched. And it was providential. This was land that was given to the American people." Again, I'll show you another painting by Cole. This is a distant view of Niagara Falls. This was actually painted in 1828. It is at the Art Institute of Chicago. This painting of Niagara Falls, one of the great wonders of the world and one of the great wonders in the United States, one of the great and most picturesque places. You can see again, to give it authenticity, he puts Native Americans in there. Okay. Again, beautiful painting, very lush, romantic. Is that for me? My wife's in the back, she's not coughing up. Very rich, very romantic. What Cole's not showing you is, in reality, there were a whole bunch of mining operations on the banks, okay? But he painted those out. This was so popular, this painting was so popular, that it was turned into an engraving, as you can see here in 1831. It was eventually sold as an engraving by the Art Union of New York. Cole made a couple of trips to the White Mountains. His first trip was in 1828, or 1827. Cole had kind of burst on the scene in 1826. His painting of Caterpillar Fall, which I showed you earlier, had kind of put him on the map. He became very famous and had very wealthy backers, Newman Reed and Daniel Wadsworth. Backed him. Wadsworth suggested that he go up to the White Mountains. So this is a painting he did in 1827 in the White Mountains. It's called View of the White Mountains. And it's in the Wadsworth Athenaeum now. And Mount Washington? Yeah, Mount Washington in the background. It took him almost 4 days to get to Conway from New York City, where he had his studio. There were no railroads in those days, and this is the period before the railroads. After this, Cole went to Europe. He studied in Europe for a little over 2 years. He first went to London, where he met John Constable, the British landscape painter, whom he very much liked. And he also met J.M.W. Turner, who nobody liked. And then went to Paris, and then on to Italy, where he actually studied with Pietro Benvenuti. It was the only time that he had taken actual art lessons. He had taken art lessons from the Italian painter Benvenuti, came back, and in my opinion, I think he came back with a much stronger technical style after his return to the United States. He painted this view this is a view of the mountain pass called the Notch in the White Mountains, Crawford Notch. And this was painted in 1839. He had visited with Asher Duran. They had both gone to the White Mountains in 1836, I think. And how these artists worked was Cole had this way of working. What he would do is he would go up to something like Crawford Notch and he would sketch it. And if you look at his workbooks, he will, in detail, he will tell you what colors go where. Even though he's sketching in charcoal, he put detailed notes of what goes where, and then would go back and paint in New York City. The Hudson River School, we talk about it being the Hudson River School, it really should be known as the 10th Street School in New York, because that's where they all had their studios, on 10th Street. And they all knew each other. All of the various artists of the Hudson River School would know each other. This painting, of course, is of Crawford Notch. The painting, the Willey family tragedy. Is everybody familiar with the Willey family tragedy? Right. So the Willey family. I'm glad you're here. The Willey family here. The Willey family had a house in Crawford Notch, and there was a torrential rain, and there was a landslide. They decided that they weren't safe in their house, and they went to an outbuilding nearby with their 3 children, and they also had 2 farmhands. And they went to that building, and of course, there was a rock slide, destroyed it. If they had stayed in their house, they would have been safe. As a matter of fact, somebody went into their house afterwards. The Bible was open on the dining room table. They were that safe, but they were wiped out, and 7 people died. The reason why this became national news, this was like, oh my God, what a tragedy. So this was national news, and it's created, it's created some mythology to it, really. And the house itself would have been kind of around the corner from here. But this painting that Cole did kind of memorializes that area of Crawford Notch where the Willey family tragedy took place. And of course, again, it made national news. Let me shift gears for a second. I want to talk about Asher Duran. Asher Duran, and the quote here, "Nature is fraught with lessons of high and holy meaning, only surpassed by the light of revelation." Again, most of these artists were very religious. Thomas Cole, for example, was raised as a Methodist. He eventually converted to the Episcopal faith. His last couple series of paintings, he did a series of paintings called The Meaning of Life, or The Voyage of Life. And The Voyage of Life, very heavy religious overtones to it. Duran broke from Cole in that he does not have the same religious overtones as Cole does, and the same drama that Cole has in his paintings. He was much more of a naturalist. So again, this is reminiscence of Catskill Clove. It's at the Currier Museum in Manchester. Again, as he developed, he tended more toward a naturalistic style, and he depicted in detail every rock, tree, and leaf in its landscape. Again, this notion of truth to nature, popularized by Jonathan Ruskin, became very popular in the 1840s. This is how artists were approaching things. Same thing here. This is the beaches in 1845. This is at the Met. Durand had been a successful engraver in New York and was engaged in New York's art scene, becoming the president of the National Academy of Design and made contributions to the Art Union of New York. The National Academy of Design, Trumbull had started the American Academy of Art, but it folded in about 1828, and artists like Cole were rebelling against Turnbull because Turnbull wanted everybody to paint historical scenes. And so they set up their own academy. It's called the National Academy of Design. It's still there. It's across the street from the Metropolitan. In 1849, Thomas Cole suddenly died of pleurisy. He was young. He was just 50 when he died. When he died, Asher Durand became the head of the Hudson River School of Painting. He paid tribute to Thomas Cole in this painting, which is called Kindred Spirits. This shows Thomas Cole here and the poet William Cullen Bryant overlooking a ledge out into the valley below, somewhere in the Catskill Mountains. This painting is at the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas now. And at the time that the Crystal Bridges acquired this painting, it was the highest amount ever paid for an American painting for Kindred Spirits. Asher Durand, like most of the artists at this time, spent time in Europe. The idea was to spend time visiting the great masters. If you went to, say, the Pennsylvania Academy of Art, you could see engravings that were done after the masters. Particularly influential was an artist by the name of Claude Lorraine, who painted in the 17th century. You could see the engravings, but you couldn't see the actual paintings. And so Asher Durand, William Castelier, and John Kensett took a trip to Paris together to study at the Louvre. When they studied at the Louvre, they met this guy, Benjamin Champney. Champney was from New Ipswich, New Hampshire, so he's a local boy. He went to Boston and actually worked in. He moved to Boston. He worked in Pendleton's lithography shop. Next door, or with one of his co-workers, was Fitzhenry Lane, the maritime painter. Eventually, he decided to go into art for himself, into painting full-time, and he decided to go to Paris. He went to Paris in 1840 to study at the Louvre. One of the real curiosities that Paul has here is this painting. So he was at the Louvre, and he was trying to show his paintings here in Paris. At the same time, he was copying the great masters. This is a painting. So there was a painting in the Louvre by the Dutch painter Albrecht Kuip, and somebody asked him, "Can you make a reproduction of it?" This is the reproduction. It's over in one of the rooms here. I think this is so curious. He was offered 250 francs to do this, but then got outbid. It's a great story. If you buy Paul a glass of wine, he will tell you the story. Okay, but I just always found this one of the most interesting curiosities in that place. He was in Paris. He was in Paris when Asher Durand, John Kensett, and John Castelier came over. He met all of them, and he and Kensett became very close friends. Kensett actually stayed in Paris for a while. He did have to go back over to England because his grandmother had died and the estate had to be sorted out. But he and John Kensett and Benjamin Champney became very close friends, to the point where one of Champney's children is named Kensett. Okay, one of the things in 1846, 47, they had gone to the Rhine River, and Champney had painted this panorama of the Rhine River. Panorama paintings were quite popular. If you've been to the Metropolitan, you've seen that panorama of Versailles, right? It takes up the entire room. It's just gigantic. So he painted one of the Rhine River. Okay. Two curiosities. One, he painted this huge diorama of the Rhine River. He was also in Paris in 1848 during the French Revolution that caused the abdication of King Louis Philippe in February of 1848. There is, if you have an opportunity to read his autobiography, his discussion of what took place in those 2 weeks in Paris were on the one side frightening because they were looting the Palace of Concord. On the other side, his naivete comes out so much in this. Like, he doesn't know what's going on, but something's going on. But he painted this huge thing of the Rhine River, and unfortunately, he tried showing it throughout the United States. He initially tried showing it in Boston. He tried showing it in Philadelphia. This became an albatross around his neck because he couldn't. Nobody was showing up to see it, and so there was all these costs with transporting it, renting a hall to show it, etc. At one point, he showed it somewhere and didn't pay the rent, so it got repossessed by whoever the hall. Eventually, a collector ended up buying it and showing it at the Crystal Palace in London, and the Crystal Palace burned down in 1853. Champney said, it was like getting a weight off of my shoulders, getting rid of this thing. But he was close friends again with John Kensett. He and Kensett had decided to take a trip in 1850 to Maine and then over to New Hampshire. They ended up in Conway. Kensett painted, of course, this very famous painting of Mount Washington from the Valley of Conway in 1851. Again, this is at the Crystal Bridges Museum. Beautiful landscape painting of that Kensett was so good with. But you can see Mount Washington in the background. This is the Conway Valley, etc. This painting was so well received that, again, it was made into an engraving and sold by the Art Union. The Art Union actually kept a lot of the Hudson River School artists in money, because if you they would purchase these paintings and then use them to put in their gallery, and also to use them to make engravings for their members. Kensett, this is where the Hudson Valley School or the White Mountain School kind of departs from the Hudson Valley School. The Hudson Valley School started by John Thomas Cole. A lot of the paintings have very, very heavy religious overtones to it, a lot. There was still a religious feeling to it, but naturalism was taking its place. Asher Durant had painted these paintings that were much more natural. Remember, I showed you that picture in the beaches of just beautiful trees, nature. It's very authentic looking. The other thing that changed during this period of time was transcendentalism. Ralph Waldo Emerson had published a book in 1836 called Nature, and in it, of course, he talked about, he created what would be known as the Transcendentalist movement. The Transcendentalist movement felt that you could be close to the Almighty through an understanding of nature. If you could deduce a greater power through this understanding of nature. Transcendentalists is very complicated, and I know about this much about them, but because of this, the Transcendentalist movement had a huge effect on artists, particularly artists who were doing landscape painting. And one of the things that he emphasized was light. And because of that, Kensett and other painters, Fitzhenry Lane, if you're familiar with his paintings, the maritime paintings, much greater emphasis on light. So this is a painting by Kensett. This is the Hudson River scene. This was painted in 1857 by Kensett. But you can see the light in much lighter. Light becomes almost a character within the painting. Similar, this is a painting of, this is view of Cozen's Hotel near West Point, done in 1863. It's at the New York Historical Society. Again, it's dominated by light. This was the effect that the Transcendentalists had, and light became much more of a factor in the White Mountain paintings than it had been before in the Hudson River paintings. J.M.W. Turner, the famous English painter, once said that light is a color. Blue's a color, green's a color, light is a color, and they used light to push for their paintings. Champney, of course, liked Conway. Who doesn't? He liked Conway. He moved here in 1851. His house, he built a house in 1854. My wife and I drove by it today. It's still there. They didn't invite us in, but it's still there. But he built a house and here is the house. It's in North Conway. This is a picture from 1907 from the New Hampshire Historical Society. He developed his studio here, and a number of painters would come and visit him. Kensett, Castelier, a number of painters would come and visit, and he would take them painting. So one of the places he would take them painting was, of course, Artist Brook. So this is a painting from 1876. It's Kearsarge House, North Conway, from Artist Brook. This is Artist Brook here. I'm going to expand that. This area, which my understanding, Paul, is by the Muddy Moose, is that right? Okay, it's by the Muddy Moose, if you're there for a drink tonight. It's by the Muddy Moose, but he would take a number of artists there to paint this scene of, again, very much more relaxed. The other thing about Hudson River School, or the White Mountain painters, was much more relaxed style. The style of the Hudson River School was much more dramatic, and these paintings the White Mountain paintings are much more relaxed and much more pastoral in nature. Just a few paintings that I want to go through by Champney. This is Mount Chutura, New Hampshire. This is 1858. This is the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Again, you can see the effect of light in this. The light really dominates this. Beautiful, the reflection of the light off of the stream. Just a very, very nice painting. One of my favorite paintings by him is Crawford Notch for Mount Willard. What's unusual about this painting is when you look at paintings of the White Mountains, there's the White Mountain, it's Mount Washington, it's in the background. Here he's standing on top of the mountain and looking down. And so the view you get is a different view than one you would get in a lot of the other paintings that you see in the White Mountains. And then this painting, one of the few paintings that you'll see, this is North Moat Mountain, but it's a wintertime painting. Paul and I were just talking about this earlier today. The painters would come up here during the summer, but they didn't come up here during the winter. They didn't come up here during the winter. It's very rare that you would find winter paintings. But Champney, of course, had established a studio here. He also had a studio in Massachusetts. He would spend his summers in New Hampshire, but then he would go to the warmer climate of Woburn, Massachusetts for the winter. But he was up here a lot during the winter, so this is one of the unusual winter paintings. And Paul is restoring a painting right now of a winter scene that I've never seen it before. It was done on paper, oil on paper. Yeah. And so if that ever gets restored, and it's taken 8 months, it'll hang in here, and you should stop by it. One of the things about the White Mountain School, and one of the things about the White Mountains was, when Thomas Cole came up here in 1827, it took him days to get up here. It took a long time to get to Conway from New York. The railroads came in, starting in the 1850s. The railroad started coming in, and so more people started coming up here, particularly for the summer. And New Hampshire became more of a tourist destination, a place for relaxing and things. This is a travel guide from 1853. It encouraged travelers from large cities to, quote, enjoy the free circulation of fresh mountain air and pure water, a pleasant and healthful contrast to the sickly, pent-up city street where it floats an atmosphere of pestilence and death. Okay? describing New York. This was being, New Hampshire was being painted as this healthy change from living in New York or Boston or the larger cities. And because of that, you started to get the large hotels coming in. So this is Glen House. These were enormously popular after the Civil War and into the 20th century. The Grand Hotels offered a variety of activities for its guests, including hiking, golf, fishing, bowling, horseback riding, croquet, badminton, and archery. Also, these hotels oftentimes had an artist in residence. By 1850, the first train travel to the White Mountains made this more accessible and eventually a tourist destination. Guidebooks came out, this became very, very popular. By 1855, there were 4 large hotels at the base of Mount Washington. Because of this, this is a painting again by Champney. It's called Picnic on Artist Ledge Overlooking Conway Meadows, 1874. This is a picture of Artist Ledge overlooking Conway Meadows. Shows a pleasant afternoon with a group of sightseers enjoying the warm sunlight and panoramic views. Instead of depicting the dramatic landscapes dominated by the Hudson River School artists, the scene here is one of scenic beauty and recreation. So there's a much more relaxed feel to the White Mountain paintings. As I said before, the Grand Hotels started coming in, the large hotels coming in. Kearsarge House, of course, was one of them, but was destroyed by fire in 1927. The 1920s. There's one piece of it remains, I think.
The bandstand.
The bandstand, remains. Kearsarge House was just stone's throw from here. But the large hotels started coming in, and they started, because of this, you had guests who would come up and they would stay for weeks on end. Or the summer. So they would stay there for a long period of time. The hotels had to have something to entertain them. So not only did they have badminton, archery, golf, they also had an artist in residence. So let me start with an artist in residence by the name of Frank Shapley. Frank Shapley was born in Boston. He spent time in France studying at the Louvre. He served in the Massachusetts 45th Regiment during the Civil War, traveled as far west as Yosemite. He eventually came back and set up a studio in Boston, but in 1873 he traveled to North Conway, set up a studio in 1876, and then set up a studio in Crawford House, where he became the artist in residence. This is Crawford House in the White Mountains, one of the grand hotels of the White Mountains. Shapley was such an interesting character. He would paint, he would give instructions in painting, and part of his job was to chit-chat with all of the tourists and things that came in. There's several, there's this interesting news article, 1892, from a mountain newspaper called Amongst the Clouds, where they describe Mr. Shapley. They say, Mr. Shapley is hard at work at Crawford House Studio. His paintings are found in the homes of those who have spent the summer months here, faithful reproductions of the many grand and beautiful scenes which are not equal in any other part of the country. People would come in, see his artwork, buy it, and it became almost like souvenirs to them. This is a painting of Crawford Notch, and you can see the train station is just here. There's stagecoach here. What normally would happen is you would take the train up from Boston, Hartford, or New York, would come into some place like Conway, and then horse carriage would come and take you to the Grand Hotel, wherever that Grand Hotel was, like Washington, Crawford House, Kearsarge House, whichever house that was. Chapley also had did a lot of interior paintings, outside looking in, inside looking out. So in this is Boat Mountain from Jackson, way up there. He was at Crawford House until 1896. He and his wife then decided to spend 2 years in Europe. When he came back, he set up shop in Jackson. He lived in Jackson until his death in the turn of the century. But he was a prolific painter. Several of his paintings are here in the museum. And again, it was one of the departures, of course, of White Mountain painting from the Hudson River School painting was these paintings were meant to be enjoyed because it conveyed relaxation, it conveyed a much calmer sense of what was going on as opposed to the Thomas Cole's paintings, which are much more dramatic. Let me talk about Edwin Hill. There is a painting right back there of the Man in the Mountain. That is Edward Hill's painting. Edward Hill was born in England. He and his brother Thomas were raised in Salem, Massachusetts. His brother Thomas eventually moved to the West Coast, was quite an established painter in the West Coast. Edwin traveled extensively in Europe and the West Coast. He spent time with his brother in San Francisco, but eventually he married here in New Hampshire. He had a house in Nashville and later moved to Lancaster. For 15 summers, he was the artist at Profile House in Crawford Notch. He painted throughout New Hampshire until 1901 when he decided to relocate to the West, closer to his brother. This is Profile House. It's a stereographic picture of Profile House just outside of Crawford Notch. This is a painting he did of Franconia Notch, and this shows that's Profile House. Okay, so you can see again, big, huge landscape. In Profile Lake or Profile House, and of course Echo Lake in the bottom here. Beautiful, again, beautiful representation. But this is where he worked at Profile House. Another painting of his, which I quite like, is haying at North Conway Farm with Mount Washington in the distance. This is at a private gallery, but one of the other themes that the White Mountain artists had was this combination of nature and man working together. So the harvest here is taking place because man is working with nature, working with the land, as opposed to this fight that you would see in some of Thomas Cole's paintings between industrialization and the natural world. This theme you will see throughout a lot of the White Mountain artists. Talk about David Johnson. David Johnson was studied with Jasper Crosby, one of the famous Hudson River School painters, and became good friends with John Kensett and John Casalier. He was based in New York, but he traveled to New Hampshire frequently. And again, the artists would generally travel during the summer, do their sketching, come back to New York or Boston. Studios were either 10th Street in New York or Tremont Street Tremont Avenue in Boston. They would finish their works there. Again, not a lot of winter scenes, but a lot of summer scenes. He was friends, of course, with Kensett. I also might mention Paul has several paintings by Kensett just here to take a look at. He eventually moved to Walden, New York. He eventually moved to the Hudson Valley and passed away in 1908. This is a painting of Mount Lafayette from Franconia Notch. Again, another, just a beautiful painting. Very open sky, the reflection of the sky in the water down here. This is the type of painting that he did. It was very much in the tradition of kind of Asher Duran, the more naturalist style, as opposed to kind of some of the drama that you would see in some of the Hudson River School painters. You mentioned Samuel Lancaster Geary, one of the most prolific painters in this area. He was born in Boston and was completely self-taught. He traveled to Europe. He set up a studio on Tremont Street in Boston, and he became the founder of the Boston Art Club. Eventually became its president in 1858. Very prolific artist, and he painted in different genres. So, although the paintings I think we have here are probably landscape paintings, he traveled. He did portraiture. He did genre paintings, etc. I will show you two paintings that are the same thing, kind of. This is Artist Brook. So remember I said earlier when I showed you there was a painting of that Champney had done of Artist Brook just outside Champney's house. He had taken time to St. O'Gary there and Gary had painted it. And if you would like to see another picture of artist Brooke, this painting is right over there. Okay, it's in the gallery. Again, artist Brooke, an area that Champney would have taken people to paint when they first arrived up here. Champney became kind of the godfather, if you will, of White Mountain painting. Over 400 artists came and visited him during his lifetime. He had a long and productive life here in New Hampshire, and again was kind of the dean of White Mountain painting. Gary also liked to paint the Man in the Mountain. Everybody likes the Man in the Mountain. And this is the old Man in the Mountain sketch that he did, and then eventually that painting. And again, we have another painting of the old Man in the Mountain by Edward Hill right in the back. This is Tuckerman's Ravine and Lion's Head. Dramatic paintings. I think at one time one of the guidebooks described the White Mountains as the Alps of North America. Not quite the Rocky Mountains, but again, another great painting. Let me talk about another artist from this period. Aaron Draper Shattuck was born in Francistown, New Hampshire. Painted portraiture in Boston before moving to New York, where he was at the Academy of Design. He took up landscape painting. He summered in Conway and eventually bought a farmhouse near Moat Mountain, near Moat Mountain House, the Grand Hotel, or hotel that was there. He was incredibly successful. He was successful by the age of 24. And he became very good friends with John Kensett. He adopted a lot of Kensett's style as far as using what would be called luminism, using this light as one of the characters, one of the pieces in your artwork. He moved to a farm in Granby, Connecticut in 1870, but he developed a very serious illness and he stopped painting altogether by 1886. He lived to a ripe old age. I put this picture in here. This is his wife Marion, and this is Shattuck on their 50th wedding anniversary. Okay, in 1926. He passed away the following year. Again, very much in the style of John Kensett. You can see, and I will show you two pictures he did of Mount Chikura. This was of Mount Chikura from Tamworth, and you can see blue sky, etc. This is the same mountain, but he changes the light, and this is one of the things that some of these artists did, was to look at light in different times of the day, different shadows and things like that. You think about some of the paintings of haystacks that were done by Monet, or Heed did paintings of marshlands in Massachusetts at different times of the day to get different effects. This is the same, he experimented with the same sort of light and its effects. At this point, of course, when we get to the 1880s, 1890s, the turn of the century, this is being, White Mountains had become a tourist destination. It was a recreational area. People were flooding in. This is a painting by the great Winslow Homer. This is artists sketching in the White Mountains. It's in the Portland Museum of Art. This was done in 1882, but it gives you a sense of the number of people who flocked to this area to paint as a recreational sort of thing. The White Mountain School, of course, kind of died out. A couple of things. One, the Grand Hotels died out. With the advent of the car, people were not coming up and staying for weeks at a time. It used to be that you would come up on the train and you'd be here for weeks. If you had a car, you could go around to all different points in New Hampshire. It kind of brought the Grand Hotels lost a lot of their allure, because people weren't staying there for months on end. You didn't have to have an artist in residence. You didn't have to have an orchestra, as some of these hotels did, and things. And then styles began to change also. New York was much more interested, New York art scene was much more interested in a new realism in painting and things. These paintings, these beautiful pastoral paintings of landscape paintings, started to fall out of favor. By 1890, the phrase Hudson River School was actually coined in about the 1890s very derisively. It was very derisive that people would be categorized as Hudson River School painters because it meant you were old-fashioned and out of step. Paintings did start to die out. That doesn't mean we still don't have painters who paint in this style, and I know he's not here tonight, but I am going to show this picture by Eric Keppel. Eric, of course, is in Jackson. This painting is in the Jackson Town Hall. Unfortunately, the Jackson Town Hall recently moved about 50 yards, okay? But this is in the Jackson Town Hall, and Bob, when does the Jackson Town Hall reopen?
Roughly.
A few months and it's still hanging.
Is it still hanging there? Yeah.
Sheet over it, but it's hanging.
Yeah, and this painting is huge. It's 11.5 feet long. And that's 6 feet high and 11.5 feet long. It's a gigantic painting. If and when Jackson reopens, take a chance to come in, or take a few minutes to come in and take a look at it. It's unbelievable. Some of Eric's paintings are also in the front gallery, and you can take a look at it as well. He very accomplished painter, very much painting in the style of the White Mountain artist from a prior century. With that, folks, I end with Albert Bierstadt, and if you have any questions, fire away. If we don't have any questions for Paul, thank you for your time, and I enjoyed seeing you.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Not sure if the rest of your